It's down?
Yep, it should be recording. We'll see. In any case, thank you for joining us, and thank you especially to Rabbi Gold and Imam Malik for joining us for this. And yeah, I'm gonna let oh, there you guys are. Okay, so I'm gonna let the Rabbi and the Imam introduce themselves and give a short introduction. But we obviously this is all we've been talking about. And then there's maybe you've thought of other things, but there's two immediate focuses here. One is of course the halachic fiqh legal approach and how our practices may change under these unusual circumstances. So Ismaeel, before you joined, we were just talking about the idea of doing a Passover evening via Zoom using electricity on holiday, which some people are used to using, some people are not. The same, of course, could be a question for Juma or for the khutbah or anything like that, right? So those kinds of questions. And then more of the philosophical question: what approach should we take when something catastrophic happens? How do we deal with anxiety and loneliness? But maybe you've thought of other angles. So, Moshe, you want to start? Rabbi Gold, I'll hand it to you, and then.
Thank you. So I don't mind. You start. I just still want to sound like not respectful or anything. When I refer to you, I say Imam Ismaeel.
Yeah,
Imam.
you can call me by my first name, Ismaeel.
Then call me by my first name too, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Moshe. I'm a youth rabbi in England, but I grew up in Israel, in the West Bank. But now I live in England, and my English is American. My parents are American. That's why, if you're wondering why I speak English, it's not. It's my parents are from Chicago, and they taught me English, of course. Okay, so it's 2 points that I would want to discuss and to open. One is regarding Judaism. The other one regarding my questions towards Islam. So, the first one, I want to. I hear a lot of things going on. It's more the philosophical thing that Shmuel was talking about. That Robert, what do you know you as Samuel?
No, I'm using my dad's account. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Robert. Okay. So what Stephen was talking about, the more philosophical. And I hear a lot of people in the Jewish community saying, oh, the virus is because of this or because of that. Either they're blaming China for eating all these weird animals, or they're blaming certain sectors in Judaism. There's even, I saw someone wrote that one religious Jewish community was blaming the other one that they don't cover their hair properly enough, because the word corona is crown, and it's hinting that they are obviously wrong in the way that they're covering their hair, and everyone's blaming usually each other for the virus and why it happened and stuff other people are doing. That's what I want to present. What a lot of Jews and Judaism people are saying. I want to say what I think about that. And what I want to know about Islam is I wonder how they deal with those similar questions, same kind of things. But also, what I want to know was, I'll start with that. I forgot. I had another thing, but.
Thank you. Stephen, should I introduce myself now?
Yeah, please. Tafadhal.
All right. Okay. So my name is Ismaeel Malik. I'm 27 years old. I was born in Chicago, actually, the same place as your parents. But I grew up on Long Island, New York, and I moved to Saudi Arabia when I was young, around high school time. I didn't know any Arabic at the time because I'm ethnically from Pakistan, which is an Indian country, as you may know, linguistically and culturally. And so basically, I moved to Saudi Arabia without knowing a single word of Arabic. I did my associate's degree in Arabic, so I learned Arabic during that time. And then I did my undergrad in Islamic studies. I'm the summer and Ramadan Imam in Iceland, Reykjavik, Iceland, in the north. And apart from that, I do part-time imam jobs whenever I get the chance to. I was the imam in Rochester, New York as well for a while. Apart from that, I'm an English teacher by profession. And hopefully I'm going to be starting my master's soon as this COVID-19 disappears, hopefully. So that's a little bit about myself. I really love the questions that you brought up, and I love the fact that you, Rabbi Moshe, you brought up the idea that a lot of people want to find answers about, who they can blame, or where they want to pinpoint a certain place where why is this virus here, basically. And that reminds me of some questions that I had sometimes some students ask me when I worked with Jerusalem Peace Builders. I know we have Oren here. Hi, Oren. And so some of these questions are often asked, like, why did the Holocaust happen? Why was there a massacre in Armenia? Why do these things happen to people who are innocent, And I think this question is very loaded, and we have to kind of unpack it. Yeah, there are many Muslims, different types of Muslims, different sects, similar as the Jews. I often like to say that the Muslims and the Jews are very, very similar, in which you have some sects that would say, oh, this happened because of this, or this happened because of that. But the Quran tells us something very specific. In the Quran, there are two categories of people. One category of people are the people that when something bad happens, they blame. Right away, they blame. And the other category of people are when something bad happens, they turn back to God. They don't necessarily blame right away. So for the first category, one example is the Qurayshiyyin, the people of Mecca at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They said, whenever it says in Surah Al-Imran, one of the third chapter of the Quran, that whenever some evil would befall them, they would immediately blame Prophet Muhammad. They would say, this is because of his monotheism. If we had stuck to our idols and we had stuck to our polytheism, we wouldn't have all these bad things. So God responds, مَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ حَسَنَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ وَمَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ سَيِّئَةٍ فَمِنْ نَفْسِكَ. Whenever a good thing comes, it's from God. And whenever a bad thing comes, فَمِنْ نَفْسِكَ. Nefesh, as you know, nefesh in Hebrew is like your soul or yourself. So evil comes as a result of your actions. While that is said, but that is true, oftentimes we see there are people who are not evil who suffer. And that's a huge question to unpack. And we can discuss that as time goes by. But my focus now, I think, I heard this is amazing. You can get knowledge and light and nur from wherever. So I was actually watching this half Brazilian, half Argentinian actress, and she said this really profound thing, where she was like, it's not about why it happened, but what are we supposed to do now that it happens? And I'd love to discuss that and see where we can go with that.
Yeah. Yes, I agreed with like everything you said right now. I think Judaism also has very, very similar sayings. I know the Rav Soloveitchik, he has a whole article that he writes regarding the relation between the Holocaust and the state of Israel, which a lot of people would saw as like you can maybe argue with the statement, but as thanks to the Holocaust, we have a Jewish state. And people were trying to say that, that the reason God gave the Holocaust is so the Jewish people will understand it's time to go back to their land, and you have to stop doing it. So that's why God did the Holocaust. Now, it's a very harsh saying and puts a lot of cruelty on God. Millions of suffering, not only Jews, the whole world, like dozens and dozens of people, millions of people died, suffered, starved in the most worst ways. Say God did that, so you have a state. It becomes very, very problematic when you try to think and cope with that. And he writes that to say that saying the Holocaust happened for the state is a wrong and cruel saying. But to say the Jewish people went through a trauma and decided to do something positive out of it, to see how they could prevent it from happening again, how could they do the best they can out of it, because of it, is the right way.
Exactly. I would definitely agree with that. And to build on to that point, so what I wanted to go with this idea of what are we supposed to do now, that's the exact thing that I thought about the Holocaust, that the Holocaust happened for a number of reasons. And that's for the philosophers and for the people that are way above my pay grade, the imams that are way up there to research that. And I have my own opinions too, but I don't merit them enough to share them here. But the point is that what do we do after that? So the coronavirus, a lot of these, not really memes, but these little photos started circulating all throughout the internet. And some of them were photos of children suffering in Syria. And they said, so how's the quarantine going? And then there were photos of children suffering in Yemen saying, I'm sorry to hear your favorite restaurant is closed. And then there were photos of children, let's say in Africa, who were saying, I'm sorry that you have no food at your house and you have to go out and, So this is the whole idea of that actress was talking about. It's that this virus, for whatever reason it happened. But what does God want us to do now that it's here? And that's a huge thing, because that's a huge thing to look into, because we can't say we know what God wants. And that's the mistake of those people who say maybe the coronavirus happened because you're wearing your hijab wrong, or because you're not following the halakha, or you're not following the sharia. So essentially what you would say is that what are the good positive results of what's happening right now? You have people all around the world connecting. You have people sympathizing and empathizing with groups they never sympathized and empathized with before. Before, no one really worried about what's going on in Italy, whether it's the crime or anything. Now everyone's concerned. Everyone's legitimately concerned about Italy. And another key point is this virus is not distinguishing between, it is not targeting people of a certain sexuality. It's not targeting people of a certain gender, of a certain religion, of a certain ethnicity, of a certain color, even of a certain nothing. Not even, it doesn't differentiate between people who are, philanthropic and people who are legitimately evil, if I can say that. And so what we learn from that is we're all humans and we're all made from the same stardust. And I think that's essentially what the message that we're supposed to learn from this. With the Holocaust, and I am in no place of saying what we can learn from it, obviously, but as a non-Arab, non-Jewish, person, as an American, I can say that we learned to say never again. And we learned that the Jewish people deserve a state, regardless of, many people disagree, obviously we have a conflict there with the Palestinians, but they do deserve a state, especially after all what has happened, regardless of where it is or when or how. And I think everyone, even Palestinians, can agree with that and should agree with that. And not only for the Jewish people, but now we extend that. That's why when there were a lot of hate crimes that were happening against Muslims, who were the first people to stand up in the United States? They were the Jewish people, because they knew what this can potentially, obviously not in the near future, but what this looks like, or what it looks like a preliminary thing, right? And the same way, when we had a lot of synagogue attacks in the United States, there was a little time period in these past 4 to 8 years. Who were the people who stuck up for the Jewish community? The Muslims. And there were others too, but the Muslims were there for them. And there are tons of articles of that. And this reminds me of one really quick article that I read actually yesterday night. When we tend to think of the Israeli war with the Egyptians, you guys are much more well-versed about this. I don't know about it. I read it in passing. But we tend to think of this as black and white, as both armies, had only hate. And this article is basically focusing on a moment similar to those moments in World War I, when, the German soldiers and the Allied soldiers would cross over and, spend some time together. They even spent, I think, one holiday together, and they played football, American football or something. So the same thing happened actually in Israel, in that there were some Egyptians in the Sinai Peninsula in a certain regiment or a certain group of the army, and they basically reached out to the Israelis and they said, we have some of your soldiers who passed away in our land. Do you want to give them a proper burial, and do you want to help them out? And so one soldier went against his commander in Israel without telling him anything, and he did this operation. And he said he went to Israel and he had tea with the Egyptians. He went to Egypt and he had tea with the Egyptians, and it was very amicable. And then at the end, they took a photo, and that photo now is in the Israeli Museum. So, I mean, it's moments like of these humanitarian values that we realize the coronavirus, it hit Israel, it hit Gaza recently. There was, I think, 2 cases or something. It hit the West Bank. It's not differentiating between anything, and that's why we need to learn from that. That's what I believe as a Muslim and as an Imam.
I agree with that it affects everyone in a way that you can't say, oh, it hurts me just like it hurts you. The fact that it hurts the Palestinian Authority, that hurts also us. It's not only that they're affected in the same way. It's the fact that if we can prevent it from getting to them, we can prevent it from hurting us. It's like it goes around and around. But there's another point that I think that, again, I'm saying mainly from the Jewish perspective that I know, because honestly, as I love meeting you now, as all my meetings with Muslims were only at plane rides, and then you meet. I had amazing conversations, wonderful conversations, but it's good to meet someone who also knows a lot. What's it called? So the point that I would like to say that I think that Judaism says, but people don't understand it correctly, is that there's a Gemara, as the sages, like the rabbis, the ancient rabbis say, that if something bad happens to a person, he should check what he's doing wrong. Right? And if he does, check again and to try to figure out what he's doing wrong. Now, some people say that, oh, you're blaming the victim. Why should he look what he's doing wrong? And some people take all these different other sayings that, oh, plagues happen because of this, and they start pinning on people. Oh, something bad happened to you, you must be doing something wrong. And I think that's exactly not what the sages are saying. Mm-hmm. Sages are saying that you have to go through a process. If something bad happens to you or to the world, you have to go through a personal process to figure out what's wrong, what you could do better. And it's never to blame someone else what they're doing wrong. And even if you want to say, oh, this person is doing something wrong, if he doesn't get to the same conclusion on his own, then it's not worth anything. The whole point is we don't know if that's the reason that the conclusion that he gets to is the real conclusion, but he has to go through through himself saying, what am I doing good? What am I doing bad? What could I change? It has to be an honest decision, not someone tells him, oh, by the way, you're putting your thing on wrong, that's why you're suffering. If he goes through a process of, I don't know, whatever he is goes through what he's doing, and that's his conclusion, then he should do it, and that's great. But if someone tells him, oh, that's what you're doing wrong, and he changes it because of that, I feel like that is meaningless. It's the exact opposite of what that was supposed to be.
Absolutely. I strongly agree with what you said, and I love this because, it's not a problem only in the Jewish community. It's a problem in the Muslim community, and here in the United States, I've worked with a lot of Catholics and different groups also within the Protestant. And I've noticed we have commonalities across the board. And so, it's this tendency to say this is happening in Islam or in Arabic, we say adab. Adab means a punishment. And the reason people might say that is, oxymoronically, they're actually less educated in their own religions. So those are the people, we look at them and you look at them and you're like, oh, they're very practicing, they're very religious. But it turns out they are, okay, they're practicing. Maybe they read the Shema every day, they read Fatiha every day. But at the end of the day, they're not very well versed. So maybe they've read a lot of stories from the Quran. We have the stories of Noah, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, who, there was the flood, the punishment for Moses, the punishment, Musa alayhi salam, peace be upon him, the punishment for the Pharaoh that was against him, he drowned. So all these punishments, so every time there is a natural disaster, their go-to thing is a punishment. But if only they read a little more, they would realize at the time of the second caliph, of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his name is Umar. He was the one who eventually entered Jerusalem and freed it from Christian rule. At his time, there was a huge plague that had affected the Sham region, which is basically Levant. That's Syria, Lebanon, northern Israel, potentially parts of Jordan too. And so that plague hit what we call the best generation of the Muslims, which is the early generation of the Muslims. And so, to say that, maybe they were doing something wrong, I mean, that's archetypal, that's example of how, even the people that are what we consider some of the most righteous people in our legacy, they were hit by these natural disasters. And we don't know why, and there are many speculations. But what we see is, how did we as a nation benefit from and take a curse and turn it into a blessing? One benefit was, there's actually, this directly connects to the coronavirus. When Stephen told me to prepare something related to Islam and the coronavirus, this is the go-to hadith, which is a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the Quran is, we believe, verbatim from God, and the meaning and the text is both from God, while the hadith, the words are from the Prophet. So they're not holy to the level of God's words, but they're very important words. So he said, if there's a plague in a city and you are in it, do not leave. And if you are not in that city, do not enter into it. So a lot of the scholars in the 21st century and 20th century, they saw this as a precursor to a version of quarantine. So let's say, a plague hit city X. If I don't live in city X, the Prophet commanded me not to go there. But if I live in city X, he commanded people to stay in city X, which from an atheist point of view, that's actually pretty impressive intellectually of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to have imagined that. And from our point of view, we obviously believe that he was guided from God, and that's why he said this 1,400 years ago, before the idea of quarantine was that popular. And so during this time, the second Caliph Umar, a plague hit the Sham region, and there was the governor of that region, or important army officer in that region, and basically there was ideas that, hey, maybe I'm gonna go leave from that area, and a lot of things were happening. But to make it short, basically they followed the advice of the Prophet, and they learned incrementally about how to deal with plagues. And so since then, things were a lot better. That's not to say that that was the purpose, like you mentioned. The purpose of the Holocaust, obviously, we can't put that was to create the Jewish state. But one lesson that we learned, and one benefit that we took from this story, is that these are an oppressed people in Europe. They deserve their own state. Similarly, the plague is happening. The Prophet gave us a certain command. How do we apply that? How do we learn from that? And today, I'd like to add the idea that now that we're all in quarantine, you'll find a lot of people from a social aspect. They'll begin to realize, you're quarantined, and that same person that you were homophobic towards is also quarantined. And you're in the same boat now, literally the same boat. And I think that's profound. That's very profound.
Yeah. Like I said, I get the fact that we're in the same boat. I see it as like literally the same boat. I mean, if one sinks, the other will sink. Not
Exactly.
that they're ultimately affected together. There's I don't know exactly what books that like Jewish Bible is part of the Quran. Also, it's not part of the Quran. They see that as
no, but we look at it as a reference. So you can go back to it as a reference.
Okay, there's one of the books. It's one of the least learned books, actually. It's because it's very philosophical. It's in the Bible. It's called the Eov. It's called, how do you say Eov in English? Robert, Stephen. I don't know how you say it.
Microphone's muted.
Sorry, in Arabic it's Ayub.
Ayub.
Job. Okay, job. Yeah.
Ayub. So the book of Ayub is very like, I don't know if you know it or familiar with it or not. However,
yeah.
And it's about a man who is very righteous and very rich and wealthy and has everything. And then God is so impressed with him, and the devil gets a little jealous and says, wait a minute, he's not only good, he's happy and he's righteous because he has it good. Take away it and he'll start cursing you. And then he starts taking away his money, killing his family and his wife, and putting boils all over his body, until at some point he breaks down and starts saying God did injustice. And then his three philosopher friends come over and they start arguing with him, saying, what do you mean? How can you say that God did something wrong? If you're suffering, you must have sinned. And his arguments go around, and he answers their argument how he was not sinning and he was perfect. And at the end of the book, he's right. He didn't sin. But he's in a different level, so God could obviously challenge him in stuff that regular people can't. But I think the main message of the story is that you can't come to someone and say you did something wrong, because you don't know who he is and where he started and what like every single person has his own life, and God has his own relationship with him, and you can't start saying, oh, you did this, so you deserve this, or you did something wrong and that's why you're suffering. It's only something that the person could do.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. And Ayub, Job in English, or Job actually, is a very beautiful, it's a profound story. And like you highlighted, Imam al-Kasai, he's one of the scholars of the stories of the prophets. He actually took the Jewish story, or the story from the Old Testament, and he mixed it with what we have in the Quran. And he actually narrated the story of the three philosophers, or three students of knowledge is what he called them, who went up to him, and they derided him in some ways. And yeah, that's why it's important, because you never know. That's the big thing is that in Islam we're also taught, especially in a sub-science in Islam called usul al-fiqh, that you never know the sabab, or the reason why something is happening. You can't be so confident and so reassured about what your idea is unless God himself said it and explained it. Or there's legitimate proof. It's like science, hard fact, that, okay, causation, especially with causation, like why does this happen? Why does that happen? Unless God himself said, why did he drown the people of Noah? Okay, if he said this is the reason, then we take it. But everything else is speculation. Also, someone was asking a question here. I'm gonna try to find. Stephen, how do you get to the questions?
Yeah, it's okay. She wanted to clarify when you said the hadith that
Yeah.
it was not to leave the city so they don't infect anyone else. So
Yeah, so that's what, so in hindsight bias, because right now we're in 2020, that's what we believe as Muslims, that's the reason why God basically told Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said this to the people, because we have an ayah in Surah Al-Najm, a verse that says, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, never spoke from his own desire or from his own will. He only spoke of whatever God commanded him to. So what we would say as in 2020 as practicing Muslims is that basically God knows about how infections obviously spread or how sicknesses spread. So he commanded the Prophet to tell his people that if you're in that city, stay in that city. Despite the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, probably had no knowledge of how diseases spread or the idea of containment or quarantine. Because again, this is quite a new idea of quarantine. There potentially could have been Greek philosophers who mentioned it. In my reading, I never came across any Greek philosopher who mentioned the idea of quarantine. Yeah, so this is essentially what it was. It was like a city-like quarantine. And I actually had a beautiful conversation with my brother, and he told me this, he pointed this out. I had never came across this in the Islamic text. But basically there was, in the same plague as things progressed, eventually one leader named Amr, who was the one who conquered Egypt, Amr ibn al-As. He basically, when the plague was getting worse and worse, he told everybody, he said, spread out, tafarraqu, meaning spread out, and let not one person come near another person. Like basically social distancing before it was cool. So, so basically, yeah, so again, what we can say from a purely secular and atheist point of view, the least we can say about this is indicates Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had some understanding of the idea of a virus or a plague spreading. But as Muslims, we say that, you know, he was actually ummi, nabiyun ummiyun, which means he wasn't educated in sciences, and he didn't even know how to read and write. And that was very essential for us, because if he did know how to read and write, then it would be pretty easy to say, yeah, he authored this book of literature called the Quran. So yeah, so essentially that's why, so what is the reason why? Maybe not to infect people, but we as Muslims, we believe the reason is because God commanded Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Prophet Muhammad told us this is the reason.
I just want to add 2 points. One point, like going off the reasoning for the commandments. He's saying, like, I think you're also hinting something very similar. Like the classic rabbis believe that you should always look for reasons behind the commandments. Like God wouldn't just give you a commandment for no reason. But you again have to be wary when you give a reason, unless he gives it, of course, explicitly. You have to be very wary with the reasons, and that the reason doesn't always define the definition of what the halacha would be at the end of the like what you actually do. And sometimes you find a reason, but you always put it in kind of like limited. This might be the reason. This is the reason I explain, even though we may find in the future that there's a deeper reason or another reason, and that's I'm assuming that's the same thing in Islam, but that's how it is in Judaism. Some people, they are a sector that say you shouldn't look for reasons, accept everything as a decree from God, just do it and play stupid. But I believe in the other way, that you should always keep your mind open and look for reasons. If God did something, gave you a commandment, there's a reason for it. And then the other point I wanted to say is that when you said, of course, we can never know the reason. I agree with that statement 100%. And people should always be more modest when they give reasons and when they think of reasons, always super, super modest. With that, I think you should be looking for reasons. If God did something to the world, it can't be that the whole world now, it can't be God's not saying anything. You have to understand that God is telling you something. He's telling everyone something. You have to go through a true process, not just accept it from someone who's smarter than you that said it's X or it's Y, but you have to go through an internal process trying to figure out what it could be, or what you personally could take from it. Maybe the whole world could take one thing, but you personally, like if you want, I could share what I went through, and I think I can learn from this whole process. But it's yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what your personal
So
take
again,
from.
it's personal. It's what I think I should do better. I think maybe it could be people in the world, not the only one that could get better at this, but I'll talk about me personally. The way it went is people were blaming China for the virus, for eating all these not kosher animals, and that's why, even though according to Jewish law, they're allowed to eat those animals. Only Jews are limited in the animals they're allowed to eat, and Judaism doesn't force everyone to keep kosher. With that, still, because they eat all these weird animals like monkeys or like all these strange things, then that's where the virus came from. But when I was researching, trying to figure out what this virus is and how it became, it seems that from what I studied, I think it's more or less true. And either way, I think for me, I can learn from it. It's not only the animals they eat; it's the way they treat the animals they eat. Meaning they can take bats and put them over monkeys and over all these different animals in cages right upon each other, cooped up, and that's why viruses can move from one to the other. And basically the mistreatment of animals is what's wrong here. And if you take, maybe that's what caused the virus. If you take that in what's relevant for us, I think the way we treat, I'm talking about the way, I don't know how Islam eat their meat, but the way they treat animals and it's horrible. The way they slaughter them, they keep them cooped up, the way they feed them. And so the solution, I'm not becoming vegetarian, I know, because Judaism does believe that you could eat meat and does believe that it's okay. But there is a limit what I can do to prevent either the amount of slaughtering, the way it's slaughtering, the meat I buy, I believe it's not done according to what they call the halacha, according to what God wanted, the way they treat the animals, the suffering of the animals. So that's what I personally learned from it. I'm not saying it's the only thing you can learn from it, but it's it's one of the messages I took for myself.
I think that's very beautiful. I definitely I like that. I like that point of view. For me, like I mentioned, I had these personal opinions that I didn't want to necessarily bring up, but like I said, I do want to share this. So why did it happen? Again, I don't feel like that's my. I'm not ready to find that answer yet or share that answer. But now that it happened, um, what can we do, and what does God want from us now? And I think that's really important for me. So the thing is that among the people that I was watching their reactions to this, and to get a little more variety of points of views, I was shocked that people, despite different backgrounds, they came to the same conclusion. They pointed out the fact that um, we're a society of we're consumers. It's a very capitalistic society that we live in, regardless of where you live in the world. We buy a lot of food that we don't eat. We throw a lot of food to waste. Again, those photos that I mentioned in the beginning of children in Yemen, for example, saying, "I'm sorry that your favorite restaurant is closed," or to that extent. These are very thought-provoking images, but they teach us lessons that now that we're in this situation, what is humanity supposed to get out from it? And I think that this is one of the most important things that we can learn from or take out from, is that essentially, um, as human beings, we've been doing a lot that was wrong, and now we're facing the consequences of it in different ways, like you mentioned. Islam also has the concept of slaughtering properly, just like there are kosher laws, there are halal laws, which are definitely very good. But again, this is the thing: is God says in Surah Mudaththir, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودَ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. No one knows the army of God except Himself. And it brings me the story of Nebuchadnezzar, because God mentions Nebuchadnezzar in the Quran without his name. His name is not mentioned. For those who don't know, Nebuchadnezzar in Arabic, I think it's Nebuchadnezzar, I think something to that extent. He was the first, potentially the first to destroy the temple, Solomon's temple in Israel, or as if people prefer calling it Palestine, I don't care. But anyway, he destroyed the temple, not the Temple of Solomon.
Keval Solomon,
It
the
was the
first
Temple of Solomon. Okay, yeah. So he destroyed that, and so God mentions this in the Quran in the first page of Surah Al-Isra, which is also called Surah Bani Israel. Surah means chapter, and Bani means children of Israel. So Surah Bani Israel's first page mentions فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمَا بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا. When the first promise, basically these prophets would come to the children of Israel from among the children of Israel, according to the Quran, and they would warn them not to do evil, not to do bad things, and if they do bad things, they will have bad consequences. So the first prophecy was فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمَا بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا. God said, I sent against you my slaves. And Nebuchadnezzar, that's referring to Nebuchadnezzar and his army. Now the Muslim theologians, they had difference of opinion of why did God use his slaves? Aren't the slaves of God supposed to be pure people, good people? And Nebuchadnezzar was clearly evil according to the Islamic perspective because he was killing the prophets and killing the people of the prophets and the children of Israel. So people, eventually some of the scholars came to this conclusion that every single thing in this universe is the slave of God. Because we have a phrase in Islam called La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. There's no strength nor power except through God. Nothing can move an inch without the will of God and without the energy that God put into the universe. And so Nebuchadnezzar, his actions were evil and terrible. But he was in some ways the army of God. And so his, because of his actions, what did the children of Israel learn after that? And that's obviously, it's better for you guys to tell me than that. But one thing we know is that in the Quran, Cyrus, well, it's indirectly mentioned, but Cyrus the Great, who was a very big proponent of freedom of religion and freedom of speech throughout his kingdom, he even allocated some money and support to help the children of Israel rebuild the temple. So you look at that, where Cyrus the Great, was not Jewish by any stretch of imagination. He was Persian, but he did this action. And so the same thing, we're sitting at home, I see people, responding to this virus in a very beautiful way, and that they're saying, hey, we're all human beings. Next time when I go out, the moment that we're allowed to get out of our cages, I'm gonna hug this person, I'm gonna tell this person I love them, I'm gonna do everything that I was holding back. Feeding the poor. Hopefully this is one lesson that people will learn now that we're stuck in our houses, and sometimes it's hard to even, I heard that Israel went to a shutdown, I think, where even the supermarkets are closed now.
No, supermarkets are open, I think.
Okay, I don't know. I heard someone told me that like they're going through something difficult.
I'm in England, but I think I heard that they're open there.
Okay, that's good. Well, in Spain, like the conditions in Spain are terrible. And we're all learning that we're equal. Another funny thing I wanted to bring up is that there are all these memes of these guys that are pretty happy that the gyms are closed, because now we're all going to be equal. All of us are going to be wimpy and weak. So, and the same with the females, that they can't go to the salons, they can't look good. So we're all going to be equal. And so this is a lesson that we're not defined by our religions. We're not defined by how we look. I haven't been to the barber in a month.
Or how we smell.
Or how we smell, exactly. So I think this is an egalitarian message that we learn from the coronavirus. As for why it happened, you beautifully stated about about treating animals poorly. That's one great reason. There could be so many other reasons that we could definitely explore.
Yeah, I also want to say 2 points. One point is that what you call the slave of God, the slave servants of God.
Yeah.
I think Judaism usually calls it the angels, meaning a servant of God was someone who chose to devote his life to God. The God works through his angels. Angels are stuff without free will. They could be spiritual beings. They could be evil people, but they're just God chose to work through them. He could punish someone through them. You wouldn't call them servants of God. You call them like angels that are messengers. Messenger is a better word. Angel or messengers they use. And
yeah, we have angels too, but
according to some opinions inside the Gemara, then I think he was Jewish. That is the story of the Esther marries Achashverosh, and they have a kid that does donate to the building of the second temple, which actually does make him kind of Jewish. But that historically that actually doesn't work out if you count the kings when it happened. But according to some traditions, that was like that.
So I want to open it up to questions from the audience now, but let's keep it interactive. So we'll get a question and then feel free again to respond to each other. Michal, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what was the opinion of you, Rav Moshe, about how we should respect Passover in the times of Corona, because many of us are like not home with our family and everything.
Say it again. How we what? I
How we
missed one.
should respect Passover, like how should we treat it? Since, like, for example, I'm
Oh,
not close to my family, and
so it's hard. There's actually a big debate now. I don't know if you saw. There's a lot of old people who can't really function the Seder by themselves. They haven't been, they're not physically able to. They don't know enough, and they always Passover, Pesach is the most family holiday in Judaism. It's like a known thing. All families get together, the old people and the young and the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, and now it's dangerous for the grandparents to be with the grandchildren. And Passover is one of the holidays where you can't use technology, so they have to be quarantined. So there is some people, a big number of rabbis, but honestly not high level rabbis, very mediocre level rabbis that came out with the saying that you could use Zoom for the Seder. There, if there is there is a way to find say it's okay, but most people wait for the big rabbis to authorize those kind of things. Right now, those kind of things are only authorized in cases where someone's on his deathbed, he wants to say goodbye to his family, and it's a holiday or it's Shabbat, then they could allow in those kind of cases. But for one night a year, even though it's an important night, even though it's a special night, even though they feel really lonely, most people will say support them before the holiday, call them right after the holiday, but you don't have to, as long as they have enough food and water to survive the holiday, then it's
okay,
just sad, but hopefully it'll be for many years they could do it.
thank you.
Yeah. I actually have a question if no one else does.
I think Maria, did you wanna? Maria, can you hear
Yeah,
us?
Maria wrote a question.
Oh.
Should I?
Yeah, I was about to ask Imam Ismaeel about something that me and my dad was discussing about a few days ago. There is a hadith in the one of Nabi Muhammad that says that الفر من الطاعون كالفر من الزحف, which means that whoever avoids diseases and plagues is like avoiding an army, because like we know of how diseases work. There is a
Sure.
story of him meeting a guy, a Christian guy, if I'm not wrong, that wanted to convert to Islam, but at the same time it was the plagues time. So what one of the khulafa sent in Prophet Muhammad sent a message to one of the khulafa telling him لقد what is it called, بايعناك, which means is when they shake the hands of a person and he converts to Islam basically after having that thought. So like there is like a continuation to it, but I can't remember. I wanted to ask him if he knows it and if he has further explanation to it.
Sure. That's a very good one. I've never heard of the second part that you're saying. As for the first part, yes, I've read about that. Al-far min al-ta'un. And that connects directly to the hadith that we were mentioning in the beginning. I don't know if you're here, Maria. But essentially, it's before the virus or before the plague reaches you. Or you've heard, let's say you're in Tiberias, and you heard back then the borders weren't the way they are now, but you heard that there was a plague in Damascus. Well, naturally, that's gonna, with travel and with people, they're gonna come down, and it's gonna reach. Eventually, it's gonna reach Tiberias in the north, Tabaria. So essentially, that's what it is. Is what when you're hearing that, and again, the way things moved and the way things happened in the past is a lot different than it is now. But when you hear that something's happening in Damascus, and you're in a nearby town or village, or you know that it's coming towards your city, then you run away from it. Then that's when you run away from it as if you're running away from an army. But if you're already in the city and it already spread and it's already there, then you have to stay in that city. Again, it's a version of quarantine for that city. And if you hear that it happened in Damascus and you're in, let's say, Medina, which is in Saudi Arabia, you don't go to Damascus. And that reminds me of a lot of funny people I've seen online who, some of my friends, unfortunately, I'm ashamed to say, one of my friends, she actually went to California during this time. And is traveling around, and it's not a good thing to do that during times like these, to travel or to do these things. And so that's why Islam has this rule that when there's a sickness in your region, then you stay put, you stay in your house. And that's actually what we're doing now that this is global. This is a global phenomenon, and you don't know where it is, and you don't know. I mean, it's affected. The United States has reached a case where a number, at least numbers-wise, that where we're actually worse than Spain. So the first country on the top, I think, the last time I've checked, was Italy, and then we have I think China, and the United States, and then Spain. So I mean, it's crazy, it's wild. But that's what it is. There's a hashtag campaign going on in Spain that says "Quedarme en casa" or "Quedarte en casa." I don't know how to say it, but point is to stay in your house, and they're working really hard to do that. And I think it's very interesting that in Islam we had this concept a long time ago.
I don't want to say stuff. I'm not sure the exact details, but I know also in Judaism they have a bunch of laws. If 3 people die in a city, in one city of a certain size, that means there's a plague, and you should start fasting or start doing all these traditions to prevent the plague. And that's interesting. On Passover night, the decree is all the Jews were told by God to stay inside their house while the plague goes wild. They have to stay in the house and not don't worry, the plague won't get into their house.
Wow, that's amazing.
No, but there it's you can't say it's the same because there every firstborn was killed. It's not a plague that really was given by person to person. It was again, you'll have the people try to explain it rationally. How come the firstborn who would eat double food and food was contaminated and stuff like that? But in the simple, it's supposed to be a miracle. That is the idea behind it.
I have a question to both Rav Moshe and Imam Ismaeel. You mentioned that we should be looking for reason and try to figure out what the reason is for every situation. But do you think that from a certain situation, such as the Holocaust or the story of Yov, for instance, or maybe even the current situation of the coronavirus, we as humans can't fully understand why God acts the way he does, or why he imposes this situation on us as humans?
So, Rabbi, would you like to start, or should I try?
Feel free to start.
Okay, so this goes right into theology in a sub-branch that we call Aqidah in Islamic sciences. Aqidah deals with what's your image of God, or what do you imagine God to be like? And that's where you have different people, different Muslims came up with different ideas. So there's some groups that I like to call the dinosaurs of the Muslims, because they're extinct now. There were a theological group called the Mu'tazila that had certain. Stephen is a big fan of the Mu'tazila. Anyway,
sorry, I have to just say, there are still a few Mu'tazila. They're very rare, but there are a few around.
Yeah, I guess they're lizards now. I'm kidding. Okay. No, I love the Mu'tazila, and so essentially, this is a big question. When God created the world, what was His role after that? So, in mythology, for example, in Norse mythology and ancient Greek mythology, there were always these creator gods that created, and then they'd take a step back. A good example of that is also in Hindu mythology, where you have the creator god Brahma, who is combined with Shiva and the third god, which I cannot remember, unfortunately. I feel like Rick Perry. But these 3 gods were combined into one, which is called Brahma for the Hindus. And so within Brahma was the creator and Shiva is the destroyer. And then there was another one which was basically had a different role. So in all these mythologies, you often have, and the idea in Norse mythology or Greek mythology, what I mean by that is that the way the earth was formed, it was formed through a creator god. It's an archetypal of a god, and so it's a creator god. So the question comes, what about the monotheistic God? What about the Jewish God or the Muslim God, which we as Muslims believe is the same God, and Christians as well. This God, was he a creator God in that he created the universe, and then the universe has its own system and let it play out, and he didn't get involved in minute details? Or is this God constantly involved in every person's life, and every action that happens, it's directly because of God? And so there's some sort of balance between these 2 extremes, called al-ifrat wa tafrit, basically between the 2 extremes. So for example, on one extreme, we have evidence from the Quran that God says in Surah Al-Rahman, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day, and we don't know whether this is a celestial day, because God mentions a celestial day, وَإِنَّ يَوْمًا عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ كَأَلْفِ سَنَةٍ مِمَّا تَعُدُّونَ. One day to your Lord is like 1,000 days, 1,000 years in your time. So the point is, God says, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day he is busy. And what does busy mean? Meaning he's granting people their wishes, he's punishing the evildoers, he's always doing this. So that's one point of view. But then another point of view, which is directly from the Quran and the Sunnah, is that God doesn't involve himself directly in every minute little detail. For example, if you just think about the world right now, there's 7 billion people in the world, and they're always doing something, and there's a lot of verbs that are happening, things are happening. Is God directly micromanaging? Is he like telling people what to do and forcing people to do this or that? And so this is where was the divide in Aqidah between Jabariya. Jabariya comes from the word mujbir, people who are forced. And they were called Jabariya because they believed it doesn't matter what we do, because we're just, whatever God said is going to happen, and we have no say in it. We have no free will. So the Jabariya believed in that. And then on the opposite end, you had the Qadariya, who believed in some version of that. And then you have the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who we are today. Most Muslims are Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who believe, no, there is a combination of free will and a combination of God's predestination. And there's a lot of conversation about that. But before we get into the conversation, the point of that is that to say that God wanted this to happen, that's the question. Did God want this to happen? And so this is why we have hukum shari'i and hukum kawni. Hukum shari'i is something that God wants to happen and is pleased when it happens. And hukum kawni is something that happens that God allowed to happen, but he may be pleased by it or he may be displeased by it. So the God that we worship as Muslims is a good God. He's Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most kind. He's loving, Al-Wadud. Al-Wadud means loving. And so basically, we don't believe that this God wanted the Holocaust to happen, or wanted the coronavirus, or wants an Israeli-Palestinian conflict even, or wants, for example, what the Soviet Union did under Stalin. But he allowed it to happen, and not out of happiness, out of anger. He's against what happened. But now that it happened, what does he want us to learn from? And how can we not put all this to waste? We need to put value to the people who passed away in the coronavirus, and put value to the people who passed away in the Holocaust, and put value to the innocent Russians who suffered under a regime that was tyrannical and communist. So what do? Basically put value by not making their deaths for no reason. There was some student who mentioned the finishing of the Hadith. The Hadith said, وَمَنْ صَبَرَ فِيهِ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ, or something like that. I didn't come across that Hadith, but Jazakallah khairan. Thanks for sharing that.
If I can say something about what you just said, that we as Muslims, we always put faith in al-Qadar, which is what God has for us. So we could never actually know that if all of those things are pre-written for humanity to go through. It's just lesson for us to learn, or that we as humans are basically doing this against God's will, or whatever he asked from us to do.
So that's a great question, but that's the division between hukum shari and hukum kawni. So when we go against what God wants, we're going against hukum shari, but we're still doing hukum kawni. Whatever happens for a reason, basically. And that goes back to Confucius and other theologies and ideas. But whatever happens for a reason. And that doesn't mean to say that what happens is good or bad. It just means it happens for a reason. So when we go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, when we go against God's will, we are still doing what was supposed to happen anyway, but we're not choosing the best path. Remember, there's all these paths, and that goes back also to the multiverse. There's a lot of Islamic opinions on the multiverse. Are there many universes? Are there, for every choice that we have, let's say I can turn left or turn right, is there a universe where I did turn left? And if I turned left, what would happen? And that's the butterfly effect and all that stuff. That said, when we, let's say, God in Islam, God is against gambling. He doesn't want us to do gambling. Let's say I go to a casino and I wasted all my money, right? If I did that, I went, excuse me, I went against God's will, in that I went against his desire, but I didn't go against what he said will happen anyways, or what his knowledge that it was going to happen didn't confine my will. It didn't confine my free will. It's like, for example, when I'm watching a soccer game that's pre-recorded, or as you guys would say, football. When I'm watching that game, right? Just because someone had a camera and recorded it doesn't mean those players are limited and they can't make decisions that they want. You know, a player decides to go left and try to shoot from the left flank instead of the right. That was his choice, but it got recorded. So God's memory is even into the future. And so that's what predestination is. It's a really complicated topic. But I just want to mention that, yeah, this coronavirus, all these negative things, God is not pleased by them. He doesn't like these things, but they happened. Now, what are we supposed to do? And that's what I want to accentuate.
Okay, yeah, so I agree with like most of the points. I say in Judaism, I'll go back to Owen's question about, it goes to the question of Ra ba'olam, bad stuff in the world. How come is bad? If God is good, how could there be bad stuff in the world? So there's a lot of discussions about it, and again, the conversation of God knows what you're going to do, how's he going to do? That's a lot of religions have to deal with that question. Similar answers. But regarding the evil in the world, like the Maimonides, the Rambam, he has a whole couple of long chapters about it. And one of the first things he says is you have to separate between evil in the world, which is part of the world, and evil, which is man-made. If it's wars, if it's people's choices, you can't come, if people hurt other people, you can't say, hey, God, why'd you make a bad world? He made the world with free choice, with free will. And that's part of the world, and it comes with the fact that people could hurt other people, and that is part of the world. But I always say there's the Maimonides, and there's we call it Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, whoever is Israeli would know who the Nachman people are. There's two radical opposite approaches about what is God saying in the world. You mentioned, like, what is God trying to tell us in the coronavirus? What is God trying to tell us if I went to the bank and the teller was mean to me? Is God trying to tell me something? Or was the teller having a bad day and it's nothing to do with me? So the Rambam, the Maimonides, he's very philosophical, intellectual. He's very much, God made the world, and big stuff in the world, you should always look for why is God doing them. But the small things, it's not God telling you a message in every little thing. When the Nachman, it's one of the people like wearing big kippas and they jump around and dancing and they're happy all day. They believe that every little thing is a conversation with God. If you had a bad day, if you missed the light, you always have to go looking for what is God trying to tell you. And I think you also hinted to that beforehand. I believe that the truth, everyone finds it somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
And you can't look at every little thing as a message from God, but on the other hand, you can't ignore certain things that happen in the world. I think the Maimonides would be very cold and would say if someone has a child which is ill with Down syndrome or something like that, it happens. It's part of the world. God made a rule, like physical world, and it's physical, so something's happened. But people could say, hey, no, that maybe there's a message here. Maybe this is a special child. Maybe I'm supposed to treat with extra love or with extra care or with extra stuff like that. So I just want to mention also, I think a point that you mentioned with one of the sectors there. So in the story of Passover, at some point God takes free will away from Pharaoh. Like the first few plagues, Pharaoh chooses to enslave the Jewish people. It says that he hardened his heart. This is on a small tangent. He's hardened his heart. He heavies his heart, it says. And they found out that in Egyptian culture, hardening someone's heart means you're evil. They would take, after Pharaoh would die, would take his heart, and the gods would take his heart and they weighed him compared to a feather. And if his heart was heavier than a feather, then he's an evil person. So the fact that he'd heavy his heart means that he was choosing to be evil. But after that, that's a tangent. After 3 plagues, God takes away his free will. And all the philosophers and all the rabbis say, well, how could God, it's one of the main things in humanity is that you have free will. How could God take that away from someone? And one of the answers is that when Moses approached Pharaoh and told him, God, this is the God that made the world and wants to let the people go. He said, I don't know God. I never heard of God. I don't know who this God you're talking about. And he says that people would always choose good. You can argue with this point. I'm saying that's an interesting point to think about. People always choose good. If you know something is good and something is bad, and it's clear to you, you would choose the good. The problem becomes when people don't want to look, don't want to search, don't know. I'm colorblind. I don't know if it's red or green. It's all the same to me. Like, I'm not colorblind, as a theoretic, someone can be colorblind. So if someone doesn't know anything, then his choice is meaningless. And the second Pharaoh was presented with God and says, I don't know God, I don't want to know God, then his free will is already meaningless. Because, he doesn't know, he doesn't want to know. If you don't choose, you don't want the knowledge, then the fact that you chose to do X or Y doesn't have any purpose to it, so God could take that away.
That's true. I want to point out one fiqh thing, Stephen. This is really important, I think, for the Muslim students who are curious about, specifically about Jumu'ah, the Friday prayers, because the Friday prayers for us is like Shabbat for the Jewish community, or like Sunday for the Christians. And specifically in the Hanbali madhab, there's a text called Hidayat al-Raghib fi Sharh Hamdat al-Talib, if I'm not mistaken with the title. And it says, وَيُعْذَرُ بِتَرْكِ الْجُمْعَةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ مَنْ يَخَافُ مِنْ مَرِيضٍ أو مَنْ يَخَافُ مِنْ مَرَضٍ. So a person is excused from attending the Friday prayers and attending the general prayers if he or she is sick, or even fears sickness, or fears the spread of sickness. So right now I would suggest that this is that time that we have the fear of sickness spreading. And my personal advice, and the advice of actually Imam is plural of Imams all around the world, they're telling you, Sallu fi buyutikum, pray in your houses. Even in the adhan, which is the call to prayer, they added this, which is very interesting historically, for the first time, at least in record, in modern history, I mean, where the adhan, which is the call for prayer, their holy words, it's added at the end, pray in your houses. They did that in Jordan, they started doing that in Saudi Arabia. I think they're doing that in Palestine. I'm not sure if they're doing that in Palestine, Israel, but Sallu fi buyutikum is added to the end of the adhan. Here in the United States, key Muslim organizations have closed mosques. So if you're worried about the hadith that says if you miss 3 Jumu'ah, then you're no longer a true Muslim, that doesn't apply to us now, because وَيُعْذَرُ بِتَرْكِ الْجُمُعَةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ مَنْ يَخَافُ مِنْ مَرَضٍ أَوْ مَرِيضٍ. And this is what the fuqaha said. Not only the Hanabila, but also the Shafi'is have their version of it. Every sect of Islam has their version of it. And so it's important to follow the rules of your government, follow the laws of the land, and also considering the fact that we have this in Islam, like from a long time ago. I know that it does feel weird. It feels awkward. And talking about mental health. The thing is that this is an idea you can do in your homes. No, I don't know if any other imams have suggested this, but if you have 3 or more people, you can make your own minyan, as you guys call it, minyan. I don't know how to pronounce it. You can make your own little congregation in your house, and you can do your Jumu'ah. As long as you have 3, and the reason for 3 is in the Quran in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, it says, فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Fas'aw is plural, and the minimum for plural in Arabic is 3, because you have another for ithnain. It's mathanna. So it was not mathanna, it was plural. So if you have 3 or at least 3 people in your home, you can definitely do your Jumu'ah. And the importance for Jumu'ah is especially for mental health. For those who pray Jumu'ah every Friday, pray the Friday prayers every Friday, you're gonna feel horrible right now. You're gonna be super depressed. You're gonna have a lot of anxiety. So just get yourself a nice jama'ah. The word Jumu'ah, which is Friday, it comes from the word Jama'ah, which means to bring people together. So, people in your home that live with you, your family, remember not to congregate more than 10. I don't know, every country has its own rule. Here in the United States, I think they said 10. 10 is max. So make your little Jumu'ahs, that's fine. And as for your regular prayers, we as Muslims, we can pray them alone anyway. Ramadan will be complicated, but I think the only complication will be the fact that, it's so fun to go to the mosque during Ramadan, at least for me. And
Ramadan?
Ramadan's going to be April 25th, I think.
Oh,
something around there.
soon.
So you can pray at home, basically. You can, and also potentially you can live stream. Praying behind a live stream, this question's brought up. My personal humble understanding is that it's not allowed, because in all of the fuqaha, all of the four madhahib, and even the other madhahib, the sects of Islam, they all have said that if there's a river crossing between, if there's a river crossing, if there's a highway, you can't, and you're at the distance, like your imam, basically your leader, is on the other side of the river or on the other side of the highway, you can't pray behind him, even if you can hear him. And that's the interesting thing, even if you can hear him, because now, you know, you can live stream your prayers. But what you can do is, if an imam is live streaming his prayers, you can sit and listen and do your own prayers on your own. And you do get the ajr, you get the reward from God for even listening to holy words. And I think that's very important for us to know.
Also, in Judaism, it's really hard. The community, the minyan, that is what's the foundation of the Judaism, especially when you're not in Israel. All you have is a community. And to tell people, daven at home, pray at home, stay at home, they say even don't go to 10, you know, because you're spreading it still. You're trying to do a total quarantine, you should limit it. They do all these Zooms, minyanim, only for the feeling. It's like you're praying alone, but you're feeling like you're praying with a group, which is important to feel the community. Now, one thing, I don't know, maybe Islam, they have something also similar, but like I'm taking advantage of these days where I don't really have work, and I'm with the kids, but I don't have so much work. I have the ability to study the Torah. It is so much to study in high levels, low levels, and it's a great time to take advantage of. Have like I learn with other people through Zoom, through WhatsApp, and it's suddenly, you know, frees your time to study, and it's a limited time, which who knows how it's gonna last. I hope it doesn't last a long time, but you like take advantage of it. You can learn so much. You could enjoy some of the time also.
So I just want to make sure we get to everyone's questions. So Gaia, I don't know if Gaia's here and or if she can speak, but I'm going to share the screen. You guys can see, can you see this one, Moshe?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so it says, have you noticed how many mitzvot? Ismaeel, you know what mitzvot are, right?
Yeah, the coronavirus gave.
Like
The washing your hands,
how many like,
not touching each other.
Basically, it's giving a list of things that it sees as being good according to Judaism or halacha that are now occurring or increasing because of Corona. So things like doing wudu and not going to, and this is in this person's opinion, or not going to events that have men and women together, not leaving Israel. You know, so it's examples like that. So obviously cherry picked list. And I had another one here. So I had somewhat similar, the Muslim equivalent. So someone shared this one also. You can see where they're going with this one. So I know you may have talked about it a little before, but where is it? But Gaia, are you here? If not, I'll read to you exactly what she said. But her question was along the lines of, do you think that religious people in your respective religions really believe this stuff? I'll put the other one up here. Do you think they really believe this stuff? There are some religious people who believe this. And if so, kind of how do you deal with that? And how do you explain to them that like this is a catastrophe, basically? This is a disaster for people who are sick and dying, and this is a disaster for people who are just hurt and suffering.
Okay, so I could say that I've seen a lot of those things, and I have some of my family members that are there are always people that believe everything. It's sad to say. People could believe, oh, it's time from God. There was people in Israel, there's a whole political situation where the really religious don't want any buses on Shabbat, and the non-religious do want buses on Shabbat. And I saw someone text, here's a punishment from God. You wanted buses on Shabbat, now there's no buses all during the week. And I saw the opposite saying, here's a message from God. You guys wouldn't let us buses on Shabbat, now you have no buses during the whole week. Which is the exact same thing as the opposite. again, these people are talking from what's bothering them right now. They're worried about the political situation for this side or for that side, and they're looking for signs from God, which in the principle, I think we can't ignore God, meaning sometimes we're so intellectual, we rationalize everything, and we don't have room for what is God trying to tell us in our life. But obviously those things are wrong, and the process should be personal. Where do I see God in my life? Where was God trying to tell me, and what process do I get to get to what the conclusion is, and not from any thing. It's the whole world is stopping, so you can always find examples to here, examples to there.
That's true. Do you want me to answer the thing for wudu?
Only if you feel like addressing it.
Yeah. So what was? Can you restate the question? The question is that what do I feel about wudu? How wudu affects the
Well,
coronavirus?
first of all, when you see someone, saying something, something along the lines of, "Oh, now people will be more careful about wudu and usul," or maybe this is because people don't do it, or this is the
Oh, okay.
advantage of Islam, kind of their own spin on a reaction, but a reaction that seems to be a bit callous to people who are
Sure.
suffering. So the question was first of all, the question was, do you think religious people there are some religious people who believe that stuff? And second of all, how do you deal with it on a personal level from a religious level?
Yeah. Okay. That's beautiful. Yeah. As for do those people exist? Then yes, we see them in the Jewish community. We see them in the Muslim community. They exist, and there are a plethora actually of them. Within the Muslim community, suffice to say, all you have to do is, well, I would actually, this is crazy, but I want to recommend you go on this website. I don't agree with everything they say or do, but Memri, MEMRI. A lot of their videos are obviously they have their own intention and everything. But the point is, if you go there, you can see the wackos of the Muslim world. If you want to have a little bit of fun and you want to see how crazy can a Muslim get, or how crazy can a Jewish person get, or how crazy, well, so you can go there and you can see self-proclaimed, scholars of Islam. Some of them are actually legitimately scholars in that they graduated within their own institutions that are pretty much brainwashing machines. But and then they say that, okay, the reasons for this is, I'll give you an example from my life actually. I was teaching English in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, and my boss, he sent me a video, and the video was basically an exploding factory and there was fire everywhere. My boss was Saudi, and so he was the academic administrator or something of the place where I worked. So underneath in Arabic he wrote, basically I'll translate to English. He said, look what happened to Israel after they sent rockets into Gaza, a huge explosion, and the whole city is being exploded, blah blah blah, whatever. Lucky for me, I had just seen that same video in the morning, and it was an exploding factory in China. And so I messaged him back and I told him, this wasn't Israel, this was China. And this is a factory, because it did look scary. It looked like the whole city was burning down. But I realized that no, that's the angle of the camera. It's just one factory, and yeah, it's bad, but it's China. It's not Israel. He was writing that this is a punishment from God on Israel for what they did in Gaza. Blah blah blah. So then he said, yeah, I realized a lot of people messaged me. So there are two lessons I learned from that. One thing is that yes, there's a lot of this misinformation that's spread, and number two, that there are a lot of rational, logical people that are religious that say, hey, I saw this in the news. This was China. But specifically about the coronavirus, about its causation. Causation is often a tool for everyone. Take politicians, for example. There are some politicians that when this coronavirus happened, they were like, this is our time to prove ourselves. And that's natural. That's the human instinct that whenever something bad happens, you want to spin it to make it fit your worldview. So you'll have everyone. Here in the United States, we have the Democrats and the Republicans. And both of them took the coronavirus to aid or to push for their own values. The Democrats were like, exactly as Rabbi Moshe mentioned, just about the Shabbat, the problems with the buses in Shabbat. The Democrats were like, see, this proves that President Trump is an incompetent person who wasn't able to, take care of this disaster, et cetera, et cetera. And, some Republicans I've heard, they said, we need to have stricter measures on immigration. We need to have stricter measures on this. This proves that with all these diseases spreading and everything. And so you have all these people, and so Muslims do that, even on a personal level. So, for example, if something bad happens to you, right, and you're involved with a religious person, they'll tell you, this is because you're always hanging out with those people, or this is because you're always doing this, you're always doing that. Yes, it's a very natural phenomena, and it happens. And the best way we can educate people is, as Muslims at least, is we need to remind them about usul al-fiqh and tell them, you don't know the sabab, you don't know the causation, you don't know the reason, you don't know what it's going to come to, you don't know why. And that's a little bit of a humbleness that will make them realize, hey, and they'll slow down. And this is why the coronavirus is one way for people to open their minds, because it's affecting Israel, and it's affecting Gaza, and it's affecting the West Bank. It's affecting everyone. If it only affected Gaza or the West Bank, then I wouldn't be surprised to hear that maybe this is a punishment because they elected an evil government, or the other way around. In fact, I actually saw this. I'd like to call it a meme, but they were serious. But I took it as a meme, where they were saying zero cases. This was when there were 0 cases in Gaza. They were like 0 cases in Gaza, and look, doesn't that prove something? And they were going off on a tangent with that. So this is why the coronavirus is here to teach us, as I quoted that Brazilian actor saying, that we're all made from the same stardust. We're all human beings. We're all one, and we're all gonna face this. And we have to face this. We're all in this together. To quote the High School Musical, the actress from High School Musical, Ashley Tisdale, she recently came out of nowhere and she did the choreography for that song, We're All in This Together, to kind of encourage young people that, hey, we're all in this together. So the point is that this is a sickness that doesn't look at your gender, doesn't look at your age, or well, it does look at your age, it doesn't look at any of these superficial things that you believe in. And that's what's going to help the people that are ignorant, that are saying, oh, this is happening because of sin, or this is happening because of political reasons, because these guys did the wrong thing. So,
like I say, also on a personal, looking inside Judaism, there's last week we read like part of the Torah every week on Shabbat, and we read about when you're not allowed to count the people of Israel. It's a prohibition. You're not allowed to count them. If you want to count, everyone has to donate a half a shekel, and that's how you count the people. You count how many halves of people, and then it makes the whole. And it says if you count people directly, then you'll get a plague. And people were saying that the elections, that there were 3 elections in 1 year in Israel, and we keep on counting the people and counting the people. Obviously, we're counting like their
votes.
Not counting them, but the idea behind it, where or a whole year of just saying how everyone else is so terrible, how everyone else is going to kill the country, not only Jews between Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims, everyone, how saying the other one person is so bad. It's a whole year of it. Instead of looking at people as who they are, look at people as numbers. Just counting. Instead of saying people have qualities, people have opinions, you can't define anybody in Wikipedia. You should see everyone as a whole. And again, that's not why the plague happens. Can't say that, but it's interesting that they reference the idea of a plague when you see people as numbers instead of as people.
That's amazing. That's very profound.
Just before we end, because it's pretty late, Charmian, were you trying to ask something?
So today, I'm a school teacher, I'm a high school teacher. So today we were talking about responsibility to protect with our students. And in fact, we personified the coronavirus to a mythical creature, maybe you could say. Even the students came up with all sorts of ideas like Thanos, like superheroes and characters like that. And it's really very interesting when you listen to young people talk about the situation. So they came up with ideas like, well, maybe it's some sort of evil power which has some good in it at the same time, because as one of you said, we try to rationalize things which we can't rationalize. So especially when you're dealing with young people and adolescents, we have to be very careful with everything that is around. For example, Stephen, what you just showed on screen now is a very, very grave example of of I don't even have to say it because it's propaganda, I suppose. In order, and it's like the pyramid of hate, even when you start off with something very basic, and we get, and we can even end up with a genocide, really. So I think when we speak to young people, especially, that's my job anyway. We have to be careful. I sent it out to all my students, this lecture. Unfortunately, nobody joined, which is also very interesting. I'm going to ask them why tomorrow. And I wanted to ask you how you, if you, the Ismaeel, the Imam, and the Rabbi Moshe, how you deal with it when you talk to young people.
I feel with what exactly? I feel with like I always like it's a nice idea to making the virus something more like playful, something not so scary. I know with my kid, it's like the coronavirus, the coronavirus. I'm like, I come home from shopping and I walk like a zombie. I have the coronavirus. Ah, to make it a game, to make it they won't be filled with anxiety and stuff like that. But I think it's important so the kids won't like they may be scarred or traumatized from it. So let's make it as much as we can less. But I do one of the ideas I do try to teach my students that I teach through Zoom is that the virus is kind of like a bad person. Like he takes his bad he hurts the weak, the vulnerable, the people that makes you people be alone. That's like obviously the it's a virus. It doesn't have a personality, but to see something evil that picks on the weak and on the sick and on the old, that is it's us as a society have to protect those people.
That's very good. I personally, I can't really speak from experience. I don't have kids, first of all, and second of all, my students, when I teach English, are usually older. But I just want to point out, I really love your accent. It's really beautiful. Are you British?
I am indeed, but I lived in France for 17 years, so.
Oh, okay, wow.
But I am from London, yeah.
Okay,
London's
nice.
going through a bad period now because they got on too late.
Stephen, I think I heard something. Can you hear me?
Stephen,
Oh, he's mute. Oh, okay. So yeah, to answer your question, I would say I like what my sister did with her kids, and basically we have my niece is a 4-year-old, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5, and basically I know this sounds pretty simple and plain, but she focused on the scientific aspect of it. She was like, this is a sickness, and basically what you always have to do is wash your hands and make sure not to touch your face. And I think the thing is that if we put obviously I'm no person to speak on this because I don't deal with children or younger students, but I think that from my experience in Islamic concepts, at least, if we put when something's undefined or it's an abstract, it's intangible, that can cause more fear. So this is why, like, I saw my sister's method. She used to just try to give a shape to it and try to explain the science behind it in the most easiest or easily understandable way to a 5-year-old, basically.
Very nice. All right, thank you so much. So it's almost 8:30 here, a little earlier for you guys. So we're gonna wrap it up, I think, unless there's someone who really wants to ask a question. I want to thank both of you, of course, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes, we're looking for some positivity. We're totally cut off, but at least we have technology. We're connected, and this is this was kind of an impetus for bringing us together, right? We had this conversation, connecting not just Jews and Muslims, but people in the UK, people in the US, people in Israel. So there are hopefully some good connections that can come out of this, and I hope you'll join me. We'll have maybe future discussions on other topics.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to the rabbi, and thanks to Charmaine.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Take care.
Take care. Have a great night. Be safe. Be well.